Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Good. Welcome to the Woods Hole Historical Museum's conversation celebrating 150 years of science at the Woods Hole Fisheries Lab with Jon Hare, Science and Research Director of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. When Spencer Baird founded the U.S. Commission on Fish and Fisheries in 1871, he was based in a small building leased from the Lighthouse Service on Little Harbor. By 1885, the present campus location had been established, the beginning of the world-renowned scientific community that exists in Woods Hole. Dr. Hare has been with NOAA since 1997, became Center Director in Woods Hole in 2016. His research is focused on fisheries oceanography, understanding the interaction between ocean environment and fisheries populations. He's also an expert on the effect of climate change on marine fisheries. At the end of his talk, Dr. Hare will answer questions. Please put them in chat, the link at the bottom of your screen, and we'll take them then. Welcome, Jon. We look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining. This is my title slide, celebrating 150 years of science at the Woods Hole Fisheries Lab. And Debbie mentioned Spencer Baird, who came to Woods Hole and started a little building at Little Harbor, and that was on June 6, 1871. So we're 3 days away from our 150th, truly 150th anniversary. We're not, so we're 150 years in 3 days. So thank you for having me talk at this very sort of this spot in time. And I guess doing it on Saturday probably wouldn't have been good, but doing it on Wednesday is pretty good. So I want to say thank you to some people first. First to Shelley DeWicki, who's on here, and Terry Frady. They both work at NOAA Fisheries. They really helped sort of, they made the arrangements with Debbie and the Woods Hole Historical Museum and helped me with some images and sort of laying out the talk. So thank you, Shelley and Terry. And I want to thank Jennifer Gaines. She works at the Woods Hole Public Library. When I was thinking about this talk, I was sort of thinking about Woods Hole history. And so I was going back and forth with Jennifer on all these questions. And she told me to go check out these different historical spots. So I did a couple of walkabouts with my dog, Finn, who's pictured here. And that's the Spencer Baird Rock in front of fisheries. And that's one of the points of interest that Jennifer put me on as we were talking about the history of Woods Hole. And then also, thank everybody at NOAA Fisheries and in Woods Hole. 150 years is a long time, and it's sort of an honor to be able to represent that here to you all this evening. So just a little bit about NOAA Fisheries first before talking about 150 years. NOAA Fisheries is a government agency. I'm a government employee. And our mission, what we do is sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, marine wildlife conservation. That means sea turtles, whales, dolphins, salmon. We do habitat and ecosystem science. We do socioeconomics and human interactions with oceans and marine systems. And we do ecosystem approaches to management. And so that's a national effort. NOAA Fisheries is a national government agency. We're the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, so we're responsible for this set of activities from North Carolina to Maine. So we work from the top of watersheds with our salmon work out into the open ocean with our whale and bluefin tuna work. So celebrating 150 years of science, what does a celebration look like? To me, it's like a big party. It's hard to get that idea across here talking to all of you. So what I'm going to do is sort of take it from an approach of almost like vignettes. I'll talk a little bit about the origins, which Debbie went into initially, and then I'll give a couple of examples of the places where NOAA Fisheries has been. I'll highlight 3 people who are affiliated with NOAA Fisheries, which I think are really important in terms of the history of Woods Hole. I'll talk about just a handful of events, which I think sort of mark important points in the history of Woods Hole and are worth celebrating. And then a couple of ideas that originated from Woods Hole, that originated from fisheries, that are also worth celebrating. So we'll just think of this as a series of vignettes that are worth celebrating. So in terms of the origin story, Debbie already talked about U.S. Commission of Fish and Fisheries was formed by Congress in 1871. Spencer Baird was the first commissioner. He came to Woods Hole in that summer to start his work and establish the base of operations. He then moved around a little bit, working out of different areas along the coast, but that base of operations continued with staff which were hired to stay in Woods Hole. The purpose of the commission was to investigate declines in New England fisheries, which we still are working to investigate. And Spencer Baird laid out a holistic vision that included oceanography and meteorology, ecology, ecosystem components, and much of his vision and research plan still holds today as it held in 1871. He then returned in 1875 and established a full-time laboratory with commission employees in Woods Hole. So that's sort of the early origins of fisheries in Woods Hole. Why did Spencer Baird choose Woods Hole? There certainly were politics involved. Reading the Woods Hole reflections and a history of the Woods Hole laboratory and talking with others about this topic. There was Newport, Rhode Island wanted the Fish Commission there, and Gloucester, Massachusetts wanted the Fish Commission. Portland, Maine was interested. Spencer Baird made the argument that it should be in Woods Hole based on scientific reasons. First, Woods Hole is proximate to two different areas. It's proximate to the Gulf of Maine and to southern New England, which are effectively two different ecoregions or different ecosystems. Woods Hole also is a natural deep water port. We don't really think of that this day and age, but that was critically important in 1871, where most transportation was still done on vessels. And this is a picture of the NOAA ship Albatross leaving Woods Hole Harbor natural deep water port. And as I understand, Debbie, you sailed on the Albatross in the early 1970s. I think this picture is later than the 1970s, but she was in service for a number of years. And the last point that Spencer Baird made a real emphasis on was that the seawater quality in Woods Hole in this area is very high. Other areas have land-based contamination, even in 1871. And he selected Woods Hole because of the high quality of water and the ability to rear and work with animals at basically oceanic water. So from that initial founding in 1871, U.S. Commission on Fish and Fisheries, it sort of started this momentum of Woods Hole as the place to go and do marine science. The Marine Biological Laboratory was founded in 1888. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution was founded in 1930. The United States Geological Survey Woods Hole Coastal and Marine Science Center was founded in 1962. The Sea Education Association was founded in 1971, and the Woodwell Climate Research Center was founded in 1985. So from these humble beginnings in this sort of borrowed outbuilding that Spencer Baird talked the U.S. Lighthouse Board out of loaning to him, we now are a world-renowned center for marine, biomedical, and environmental science. So it really is a compelling origin story for Woods Hole as a scientific community. Let's talk a little bit about the places where the fisheries worked out of. This is a picture of the outbuilding that the U.S. Lighthouse Board loaned to the Fish Commission and loaned to Spencer Baird to use in its early days from 1871 to 1885. This is on Little Harbor near the U.S. Coast Guard base. I haven't been able to find this site exactly, but it's on my to-do list to find out exactly where this building was. And I think there's some people here who might be able to help me. So from this sort of borrowed building, Spencer Baird convinced the U.S. government to basically pay to build a building, and then working with community members in Woods Hole, the community donated the land. And so this inset picture here down in the lower right this is the point where NOAA Fisheries is now. This is the old guano factory over on Bar Neck, sort of the entry to Penzance Point. So the community, a number of members of the community donated this land or helped raise money and then gifted that land to the U.S. government. And then Spencer Baird worked with Congress to get the money to build two buildings. There's a laboratory building and a residence building. One thing which was very interesting reading D.W. Bourne's piece in the Woods Hole Reflections is that once this building was built, and there were some people in Washington who saw it and said, Spencer Baird, you wasted government money by building $2 grand of a building. But Spencer Baird was, he wasn't just a scientist, he was also an excellent administrator and knew how to work the system. So he had that claim retracted and basically put that to bed and then operated. This building and the residence were the home for NOAA Fisheries until 1958. These buildings were damaged by the hurricanes in the late 30s and the 40s and 50s. And so they were eventually torn down. And that's when our present day building was built. And it was sort of, I don't know what the word is, christened is what I think of. That's more of a ship. I don't know what you do when you have a new building. But in 1960 to the present, this is the building that we're in. And the one going back to that accusation about sort of misuse of government funds building too grand of a building, one thing that was written about this building was that no government auditor would claim that it was a misuse of government funds for being so grand because it's such a square brick government style building. So this is where we are today, and we've been in it since 1960. Sort of moving on and thinking about people, we're going to talk about three different people. You know, obviously we need to talk about Spencer Baird, and his legacy is really science in Woods Hole. He was also in that time, post-Civil War, late 1800s, when science was really starting to develop in the United States. The natural historians were really starting to lay a foundation for science in the country. So I think part of his legacy is also science in the United States. This is a picture of Spencer Baird with his wife sitting, I think Mary, and then his daughter Lucy standing behind him. We're trying to identify with Jennifer Gaines where this picture was taken, so it's still a little bit of uncertainty where it was taken. His agenda, his vision for fisheries research, as I said before, still holds today. He very much described a holistic ecosystem approach to understanding fisheries, involving the fishing industry, looking at the ecology, understanding the ocean, and it's still with us today. So I would argue that he was really a consummate scientist and administrator. He was a well-respected scientist, lots of publications, very active, but he also knew how to navigate the bureaucracy and administer the U.S. Commission of Fish and Fisheries from a borrowed out building into an established facility with two buildings and a research agenda which spread across the country. The second person that I think is worth celebrating associated with the fisheries in Woods Hole is Rachel Carson. Her legacy is environmental protection and also women in science. She studied at the Marine Biological Laboratory and also worked for the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries. So she worked in Washington for the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries, and the fisheries in Woods Hole was part of the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries. So she would come to Woods Hole and visit in her work for the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries, and she knew Woods Hole well because she had been there previously while studying at Marine Biological Laboratory. So that's where her sort of ideas around environment and caring for environment really fostered in Woods Hole. But she was also one of the first, or the first woman to sail on the Albatross 3 in 1949. She and a companion got approval to sail, and she and her companion broke the barrier for women going to sea. And so it really is sort of a legacy of environmental protection and women in science, which I think is worth celebrating as part of thinking about the role of Woods Hole in science. And the last individual that I'd want to just celebrate here this evening is Ambrose Gerald. Ambrose worked for NOAA Fisheries from 1978 to 2016. And his legacy in our community and really in our country is including diversity, equity, and inclusion ideas in marine science. He was one of the founders of the Woods Hole Diversity Advisory Committee and was its first chair, and that was formed in 2004. And he was also the director and one of the founders of the Partnership and Education Program, which started in 2009 and continues to this day. And Ambrose and others like him in the Woods Hole science community recognized that we need to increase diversity in the sciences to improve our science, and then acted on that intent by forming the Woods Hole Diversity Committee, the 6 institutions in Woods Hole, and the Partnership for Education Program, giving internship opportunities to underrepresented minorities, again, among the 6 institutions in Woods Hole. So Ambrose's legacy is diversity, inclusion, and equity in marine science. Moving on to events, we're going to look at 3 different events that have sort of important in the history of Woods Hole. 1885, the Woods Hole Science Aquarium opened. So those two buildings that I showed earlier, the first floor of the laboratory building housed the Woods Hole Science Aquarium. And this came from Spencer Baird's vision that in order for the public to support science, science had to be accessible and visible to the public. He was asking Congress to provide funding for the U.S. Commission on Fish and Fisheries. He understood that to ask Congress for those funds, that the public also had to be invested in and understand the role of science in their community. So his goal, his intent was make an aquarium, let people experience the wonders of the marine world, as best as they can. And that intent is still with us today. And I think it's an excellent example for us to carry forward, that we need to make sure that we're communicating the reasons why we do the science that we do, to continue to have the support of the American public for science. Second event, this one's a little, I don't know, it's not quite as large as founding of the aquarium, but I just find it intriguing. And in 1975, I'm going to call it Cold War science. So 1970s, foreign fishing fleets were fishing off of the United States, taking huge quantities of fish. These were Russian vessels and Polish vessels and Bulgarian vessels. Part of their ability to fish in U.S. waters was to do science related to those fisheries. So there were agreements between the NOAA Fisheries Lab in Woods Hole and scientists at these other countries to work together on scientific problems. So these research vessels from Poland and from Russia would come in, put into port in Woods Hole, and then the crew would be like, well, what are we going to do? So in 1975, there was a soccer game between the crew of the Polish ship Wieczna and the Falmouth Elks Club. There's no record of who won or lost that game, but I think everyone had a good time just doing something that people do no matter what country they're from. Also, when reading up on sort of the history of Woods Hole, there was a soccer game between the crew of a Russian ship and the Mass Maritime Academy soccer team. So you think of science and soccer as ways to sort of help us get through the Cold War together. This also started more than 40 years of scientific collaboration with Poland. NOAA Fisheries is still actively involved in science with the Polish equivalent of NOAA Fisheries. And that collaboration can be rooted back to this Cold War science that was done with foreign vessels visiting Woods Hole for scientific reasons. And the other piece of this is Woods Hole really is known worldwide. If I go anywhere in the world and I say that I work in Woods Hole, it immediately resonates with people that Woods Hole is a center for marine science. And that's one of the real joys of working in this community. The last event is the most recent one. On Friday, June 4th, 2021, the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, came and visited the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and NOAA Fisheries. And she came at the explicit invitation of Senator Markey, who's shown here on my left. Secretary Raimondo and Representative Keating are on my right. And they are talking to Nicole Bartlett, who works for NOAA Fisheries and lives in Mashpee. But she came here explicitly to learn about the science that is done in Woods Hole and to show that she appreciates the value of science, both at NOAA Fisheries, but also in the Woods Hole community. And during her closing remarks, she envisioned sort of a Silicon Valley-like model for the blue economy. And she almost challenged us in this region in Woods Hole to sort of have our science work to inform and advance a blue sustainable economy for the country and for the world. Now moving on to just a couple of ideas that have come out of sort of the Woods Hole science community. This one's close to my heart. As Debbie said, I did a lot of work with climate change, but Clyde Taylor, who was a scientist at NOAA Fisheries, and Henry Bigelow, who was the founder of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and Herb Graham, another scientist at NOAA Fisheries, wrote in 1957, for many years, Americans have commented on the apparent warming of their climate. This is 1957. Many Americans say the climate's warming. Climatologists long shrugged off the idea as unfounded. So scientists didn't believe them. But a decided trend towards warmer winters is now well documented. So in 1957, many in the American public felt that climate was changing. Scientists came around to the idea, and Taylor, Bigelow, and Graham documented the effects of these warming winters on marine fisheries and marine ecosystems in this region. If only these ideas have caught on in 1957, one wonders where we would be in our conversation today. But I think Woods Hole has always been a source of ideas and insights like this, putting together the effects of environmental change on marine resources. The other idea, I think, which is, it's an obvious one, given that we celebrated Rachel Carson earlier, is this idea of environmental conservation. And this is a picture of Ms. Carson on the vessel. I'm not going to pronounce the name. I'm going to butcher it. The USS Philanthrope or something. I think that's right. This is when she was studying at MBL and she was on a day trip. So she had a close relationship with Woods Hole. I think probably gained an appreciation for the marine environment. She went on to write, The Life Under the Sea and Silent Spring, and those books really sort of were part of the environmental movement in the United States. Her quote, which is at the statue of her in the park across from MBL, was, "I had my first prolonged contact with the sea in Woods Hole. I never tire of watching the tidal currents pouring through the hole, that wonderful place where whirlpools and eddies and swiftly racing water." She, close connection to Woods Hole, writes some very influential books, which are at the beginning of the environmental movement. The Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Management and Conservation Act are passed during that period of the late 60s, mid 70s, when the core environmental legislation in this country was passed. And now most of what we do in NOAA Fisheries is tied back to these laws. So it's a very interesting sort of circling back to this environmental conservation movement, which has roots in Woods Hole, which Rachel Carson wrote about, which led to the laws that we are now working to provide science to implement. So I think that idea is really a key idea in celebrating Woods Hole. So just looking back a little bit, trying to reflect on sort of putting together this talk and thinking about Woods Hole as a science community, Spencer Baird seems like a remarkable man. He had very scientific reasons for choosing Woods Hole as the place to work, and those reasons are as valid today as they were 150 years ago. And he had a vision. He had a scientific vision for an agenda for understanding fisheries, but he also had a vision which included public outreach and education and understanding oceanography. And so he really wanted Woods Hole to be more than the U.S. Commission of Fish and Fisheries, I think. But because he was working within the government confines, that was not possible. But then these other institutions were able to develop in sort of after fisheries was here. And that gets into this momentum. We are working off of a momentum of 150 years, 6 world-renowned science institutions working together in one community, and the strength really is that community. 3 other pieces that I think are important are this community allows us to have foresight, and I would put that Taylor, Bigelow, and Graham paper as foresight. They saw climate change in 1957. They wrote about it. It didn't have the impact that, looking back, hindsight is 2020. Didn't have the impact that maybe it could have from where we are now. But there is foresight of thought, and that's something that has made Woods Hole successful, across a range of issues. There's a number of examples that I could give. And I think that foresight comes from this diversity of organizations, of people, an openness to new ideas that comes out of our Woods Hole community. And in this last piece, again, Spencer Baird's vision, it's public access. The public needs to believe in science. They need to see science. They need to understand science to be willing to support it. And so I think coming back again to Spencer Baird's vision, it's very much worth celebrating. I think this is my last slide. So I agree, after putting this talk together, science is something to celebrate. Thank you very much, Debbie, for letting me talk a little bit about the Fisheries Lab in Woods Hole. It is interesting to think about the next 150 years, but that's too much for me. So maybe we should think about the next 10 years. Where, how do we want this community to develop? What directions do we want to go in the next 10 years? Again, coming back to that main point, Woods Hole is a community. It started in an outbuilding, and now we have world-renowned science institutions in environmental science, biomedical science, oceanographics, education. So we've got a lot of energy and momentum to carry us forward, but we need to keep working to get forward. And I'm just going to end with, some of you may know John Bullard. He worked for NOAA for a number of years, and that's where I know John from. He was also head of Sea Education Association for a period of time. And he always used to tell me that we are in it together. And so how can we bring that perspective to sort of the Woods Hole community and science in the Woods Hole community? So with that, we have a couple of websites. This might be hard for you to, copy this information down, but anyone can email me and we can provide more information about the 150th anniversary that's being celebrated. Shelley DeWicki, who's on, is leading that for us from the NOAA Fisheries. And then we also have the Northeast Fisheries Science Center website. And I think, Debbie had written an article that was in the Enterprise on the 150th. And so that it's in the sort of the supplement, I think. So there is information that can be gained there as well. And so with that, thank you very much. And I would be happy to answer any questions or engage in any conversation.
Great. Thank you, John. I see a question from Charlotte Emmons-Moore. Is the 1960 building adequate for needs today? What other facilities does the fisheries currently have?
So two questions there. So again, as I said, we are part of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, which works from North Carolina to Maine. And we actually have facilities in 5 states. We have a field station in Orono, Maine. We have our Woods Hole location, and then 3 other locations in Falmouth. And then we have a laboratory in Narragansett, Rhode Island. We have a laboratory in Milford, Connecticut, and we have a laboratory in Sandy Hook, New Jersey. And each one of those provides unique capabilities to us to meet that very broad mission I talked about in the beginning. So we are located across the region of which we serve, which from my own personal perspective makes sense. In terms of adequacy, 1960, so it's a 60-year-old building. It's certainly showing its age. We continue to make the best use of it that we can, but we are beginning to explore possibilities for what we call in government recapitalization.
Might it be possible to ask an oral question as opposed to a written one?
Okay.
No, this is Ed Hughes and Sue Hughes from West Falmouth. I'm curious, John, you talked about the next 10 years. What might be your beautiful historical retrospective? What might be 2 or 3 your major scientific undertakings now that will go through the next 10 years? And what might be their principal impacts?
So, you're asking me from my NOAA Fisheries seat. So I'm sure that you would get a different answer from the different institute, or maybe get a different answer from the different institutions. I think first and foremost, from a NOAA Fisheries perspective, is climate. When we look at those laws, the Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Management Conservation Act, those were all written in a time when we thought that the environment and climate was stable but variable. But now we know climate is changing and it's variable. So it really is challenging us in terms of how we implement the laws that we are supposed to implement. That's work that we are doing in collaboration with Woods Hole, USGS, Woodwell Climate Research Center. So I think this community is in an excellent position to address the challenges around climate change. The other area where we are active is many of you have heard about wind energy development. The Vineyard Wind project south of Martha's Vineyard was recently approved. So they're going to be developing large-scale wind energy in our region. And so NOAA Fisheries is working to ensure that fishing and wind energy development and marine mammals and sea turtles can coexist and try to keep them as complementary activities as opposed to activities that are in conflict. And then the third area, which I think we have the real, we have everything it takes to make a real difference, is around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the sciences. Ambrose Gerald has worked in that area, really set the stage for us. The 6 institutions have an effective way to work together. And I think we really are poised and have an understanding of how to do it right to really advance that idea as well. So those would be my 3 answers, but I'm sure you'd get slightly different answers from different organizations in the future.
Yeah, sure. Now, what about the decline of the fisheries?
I would propose that part of the decline of the fisheries is tied into the climate change issue. And if you go back and look at that Taylor Bigelow Graham paper in 1957, much of what they described, we are also seeing now. And so there's, I think we had been approaching fisheries that the climate is constant, but the environment is variable. And I think we need to reframe how we think about it, that the climate is changing and the environment is variable, and then work that into how we manage fisheries for sustainability.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Next question. Is there a plan for animals or exhibits where the seals used to be?
So Debbie gave me a heads up that I might get this question. So currently our aquarium is closed. As we were talking about before, we are part of the U.S. federal government. So we are sort of, our access to our facilities is being determined by NOAA Fisheries in Washington, D.C. And so our first step, we are still, most of us, any office work is being done off-site. We are using the laboratory for work that needs to be done in a laboratory or to prepare for our field work, our cruises. The scallop survey just left, I think it was yesterday. So there was a group of people in there getting ready to get the scallop survey underway. So our first step would be to get everyone back into their offices. I don't know when that's going to be. And then we could think about opening the aquarium again to the public. And I don't know when that's going to be. And then once we're open again to the public, we can start again investigating whether or not we are able to get animals to use that outdoor space. So we're trying to take it, I would say at this point, we're at 1 week at a time. We're no longer, for a long time, we were at 1 day at a time during the pandemic. But I think it's fair to say we're now at a week at a time.
Okay. Any more questions? No. This has been recorded, so we will post it on our website. So if you want to listen again or have friends who have missed it, it'll be posted in a few days, right, Griffin? Anyway.
Yes.
Okay, good. So if there are no more questions, I guess we'll sign off now. And thank you all for being here.
Hello.
Oh, wait a minute. Yep.
My name is David Vine.
Okay.
And it's kind of an offside question I have, and John probably has no idea what I'm talking about. But in the 50s and 60s, NOAA put out a series of cooking pamphlets. And I happen to have bought they were 20 to 25 cents a piece, and it probably cost me $200 to $300 to get them now. I have a copy, and I'm coming to Woods Hole, and I can bring them, but I'd like to see how maybe we could get that reproduced or put out on a cloud or something like that. They were done by the home economists. There's about 6 or 8 of them, and they're the finest cooking series on seafood I've ever seen. I have 3,000 or 4,000 cookbooks, and about 100 are seafood, and these are by far the best.
So you said you're coming to Woods Hole, so my email is there, so let me know when you're coming. I guess, the one question is who published them? Just to make sure that they're not copyrighted.
I wrote an email and sent it to the gal that set this up.
Okay.
And she probably I didn't know who to send it to before.
Passed it along.
I
headed there.
You passed it along, and I didn't get a chance to read it. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. Well, I just sent it today, so I'm not surprised.
Okay.
But I was just wondering to see who I might, if it's possible to even get it reproduced or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the first question is copyright. Who owns the copyright? If it's
it's the federal government.
Okay, if it's the federal government, then I'm almost certain it can be distributed, and we can certainly look into that just to confirm. And then if that is true, then we can just work on making good electronic copies. And I don't know if the Woods Hole Museum would want to make them available, or if it's something that NOAA Fisheries would want to make available. It sounds like a real treasure.
Yeah.
Well, it really is. It's phenomenal.
What's your favorite recipe in there?
Oh, I live inland. It's hard for me to find food. It's just a representation of how to buy it, what to look for, what it is, how to clean it, how to cook it. It's very simple recipes. It's not fancy things like you get today, and with blending all these different vegetables and things. So, but for what it is, it's fabulous.
Very good. Yeah, I look forward to email me and we can get together and talk about it.
I'll forward email to you. I have your address now.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Just so people might be interested, my parents actually, we lived on 25 Juniper Point Road, and we bought the carriage barn for the Crane estate. And our father was able to get the glass from the original aquarium, and those were our bay windows for 50 years. And then next door at the Percy house, he bought a lot of pink granite that was used to build the original building and other things. And he made a retaining wall and a bomb shelter, but it's there in Woods Hole. So anyway, people thought might be interested in that. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah, so George Lyle says the National Marine Fisheries used to publish these recipes, trying to get people to eat more seafood. Terry Frady knows all about this, so we'll ask Terry.
Very good. Yeah, I know that that the idea of trying to get people to eat more seafood is everything old is new again. Is that what the saying is, or everything new is old again? I can't remember what it is. We were sort of come back around in that circle.
Yeah.
Hi, Debbie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, this is Joe Kramer. I work actually, John, with Kim and Jennifer Gaines at the library. Actually, I volunteer. But I have a question for you. With you being the director of the science and research section there at NOAA, can you tell me, and maybe others too who don't know, what really your tasks and duties are, what you're involved with personally at NOAA? Because I don't know.
So what I'm involved in personally, or what the Science Center is involved in?
What you direct, what you're involved with, what your responsibilities and tasks are with NOAA.
Okay, so it's the NOAA Fisheries mission. Again, we work in fisheries. We work with whales, dolphins, sea turtles, salmon, Atlantic sturgeon, what we call protected species. We work with aquaculture. We work sort of understanding marine habitats and how animals use marine habitats. We work with marine ecosystems to understand how the ecosystem affects the marine animals that I just listed. We also work to understand how humans interact with the marine environment. So the economics of fishing, or the social aspects of aquaculture and siting aquaculture. We also work, again, I talked a little bit about climate change, and then the interaction with offshore wind. So it's that whole sort of scope of issues. And we are the science center. So we conduct research and make measurements and provide our summary of the science to managers. And those managers could be fisheries managers, or those managers could be people making decisions about North Atlantic right whale, or it could be helping define the economic impacts of the coronavirus on the fishing industry in the Northeast region. And we work from, again, Maine. We do some work up into Canadian waters, and we work all the way down to North Carolina. Our salmon work is in, the rivers in Maine, and our whale biologists are in ships, 200, 300 miles offshore. So it's a pretty big area of science. But I think the one theme which ties us together is we're focused on the sort of the animal and plant components of the marine ecosystem. We do some work with sort of the physical oceanography and the chemical oceanography, but our main focus are the animals that live in marine ecosystems. So it's that whole structure for the Northeast region. And then NOAA Fisheries, I have a counterpart who sits in Miami, who is the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, and who sits in La Jolla, who's the Southwest, and who sits in Seattle, who's the Northwest, and who sits in Juneau, Alaska, who's the Alaska, and who sits in Honolulu, who's the Pacific Island. So it's a bunch of regional science centers sort of put together for this national sort of science effort around what we call living marine resources, the fish and clams and mussels and turtles and whales and dolphins and sturgeons, and how do they use the marine environment? How do we use the marine environment? I don't know if that was too abstract or if that helped answer your question.
No, yeah, that's amazing. You're a busy man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem keeping busy, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Got it? Okay, as I said, this will be posted on our website, and thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jon, so much. That was great. We all learned a lot. So
great. Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you very much, everybody.